Flames roared into the Seattle night sky, twisting metal groaning under the intense heat. David Miller didn't hesitate when he saw the crumpled Mercedes on the embankment. He shattered the glass, pulling a dying woman from the wreckage mere seconds before it exploded. He thought he was just saving a stranger's life to set a good example for his little girl. He never suspected that the unconscious woman in his arms held the power to either rewrite his family's destiny or destroy it entirely. Rain lashed against the windshield of David Miller's rusting 2008 Honda Civic, the wipers squeaking in a losing battle against the Washington downpour. It was 2:15 a.m. on a Tuesday. David's eyes felt like they were lined with sandpaper. He had just finished a grueling 14-hour shift, first under the hydraulic lifts at Pete's Auto Repair, and then ferrying intoxicated passengers around downtown as a rideshare driver. Every ache in his 32-year-old body was a reminder of the ticking clock. His 6-year-old daughter, Lily, was asleep miles away in their cramped, drafty apartment, watched over by Mrs. Higgins, their elderly neighbor. Lily had been born with a congenital heart defect. The medication kept her stable, but the pediatric cardiologist had been uncompromising. Without a specialized valve replacement surgery by the end of the year, her heart would simply give out. The price tag was $40,000. David had exactly $2,014 in his savings account. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, navigating the treacherous curves of Interstate 90. The road was slick, reflecting the amber glow of the streetlights like a dark mirror. Suddenly, a pair of blinding LED headlights appeared in his rearview mirror, approaching at a terrifying speed. A sleek, midnight black Mercedes AMG roared past him, its engine screaming. David frowned, muttering under his breath about reckless drivers, but his annoyance morphed into sheer horror a second later. As the Mercedes took the sharp bend near the Mercer Island exit, the brake lights flickered, but the car didn't slow. It fishtailed violently. The tires shrieked over the wet asphalt. With a sickening crunch of tearing steel, the luxury vehicle smashed through the concrete barrier and launched into the darkness, tumbling down the steep, wooded embankment. David slammed on his brakes, throwing his Honda into park on the shoulder. He didn't think about his exhaustion. He didn't think about his suspended license, a casualty of unpaid medical debts, which made any interaction with law enforcement a massive risk. Adrenaline flooded his veins. He grabbed the heavy steel tire iron from his passenger floorboard and scrambled down the muddy, rain-slicked slope. The scene below was a nightmare. The Mercedes was wrapped around a massive pine tree, its front end crumpled like a discarded soda can. Thick, black smoke was already billowing from the cracked hood, and the acrid stench of leaking gasoline filled the damp air. An ominous orange glow flickered deep within the engine block. "Hey!" David yelled, his boots slipping in the mud as he reached the driver's side. "Is anyone in there? Can you hear me?" Through the spider-webbed glass of the window, he saw her. A woman in a tailored ivory suit, slumped over the deployed airbag. Blood trickled down her pale forehead, stark against her dark hair. The flames under the hood suddenly surged, licking at the windshield. The fire was spreading fast. David yanked on the door handle, but the frame was warped. The door was jammed shut. "Hold on!" he roared. He swung the heavy tire iron with all his might, smashing it into the tempered glass. Once, twice, 3 times. The window shattered inward in a cascade of glittering diamonds. David reached in, ignoring the jagged edges of glass biting into his forearms. He fumbled for the seatbelt release, but the mechanism was crushed. The fire was growing, the heat searing his face, the roar of the flames drowning out the rain. Panic clawed at his throat. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his trusty pocket knife, a cheap gas station tool, but sharp enough. Sawing frantically at the nylon webbing of the seatbelt, he felt the woman stir. Her hand, trembling and cold, blindly reached out and gripped the sleeve of his faded blue mechanic's jacket. "Don't leave," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I've got you," David grunted, slicing through the last threads of the belt. He grabbed her under the arms and pulled. She was dead weight. The metal groaned, and a loud pop echoed from the engine compartment. The gas tank was going to blow. He hauled her out through the shattered window, dragging her over the wet earth, his boots scrambling for purchase on the steep incline. They were barely 30 feet away when the explosion hit. A shockwave of heat and concussive force threw David forward. He curled his body over the woman's, shielding her from the shower of burning debris and shrapnel that rained down on the muddy slope. For a long moment, the only sound was the roaring inferno of the wreckage and the harsh rasp of David's breathing. He pushed himself up, coughing on the thick smoke. He looked down at the woman. She was breathing, though unconscious. Around her wrist was a heavy, silver watch, a Patek Philippe, though David didn't know the brand. It was shattered, frozen at 2:24 a.m. In the distance, the wail of sirens pierced the night. Someone on the highway above had called 911. David looked at the woman, then up at the flashing red and blue lights approaching the bridge. If he stayed, the police would run his name. They would see the bench warrant for his unpaid tickets and the suspended license. He could be arrested tonight. If he went to jail, who would take care of Lily? Mrs. Higgins could only do so much. The state would take his daughter. "I'm sorry," David whispered to the unconscious woman. He carefully slipped his mechanic's jacket off, rolling it up and placing it under her bleeding head to keep her neck straight. By the time the first paramedic scrambled down the embankment, David Miller was already a ghost, dissolving into the rainy Seattle night, leaving behind nothing but a stranger clinging to life. Victoria Croft did not wake up peacefully. She surfaced from the darkness with a sharp, ragged gasp, her eyes snapping open to the harsh, sterile lights of Harborview Medical Center. Pain radiated from her ribs, a deep, bruising ache that made every breath a battle. "Ms. Croft? Victoria, please, try not to move." The voice belonged to a doctor hovering over her, but Victoria's gaze darted past him, landing on the imposing figure standing by the door. Thomas Harrison, her head of security, stood like a granite statue, his tailored suit hiding the bulk of a former Special Forces operator. "Thomas," Victoria croaked, her throat feeling like it was lined with ash. "Report." The doctor looked appalled. "Ms. Croft, you've suffered a severe concussion, 3 cracked ribs, and minor lacerations. You were in a catastrophic car accident." "I know what I was in, doctor," Victoria interrupted, her voice gaining an icy edge despite her weakness. "I need a moment with my head of security. Out!" The doctor sighed, knowing better than to argue with the 30-year-old billionaire CEO of Vanguard Innovations, the largest logistics and tech empire on the West Coast. He quietly left the room. Thomas stepped forward, his expression grim. "You're lucky to be alive, boss. The car is unrecognizable. A total write-off." "The brakes failed, Thomas," Victoria said, her eyes narrowing. "I was taking the Mercer curve. I pressed the pedal and it went straight to the floor. The AMG was serviced 3 days ago. Brakes don't just fail." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I already had a team look at the wreckage before the police impounded it. You're right. The brake lines were tampered with. It was a clean cut, designed to burst under high pressure. Someone tried to kill you." Victoria closed her eyes, a cold fury settling in her chest. She had enemies. Plenty of them. Taking over Vanguard Innovations after her father's sudden stroke had made her a target. The board of directors, largely comprised of old guard traditionalists, hated her aggressive expansion into AI and automated shipping. Chief among them was Richard Caldwell, her father's former partner, a man who had openly threatened to remove her by any means necessary. "Does Caldwell know I'm alive?" she asked. "It's all over the morning news," Thomas replied. "But there's something else, Victoria. The police report states you were found 30 feet from the vehicle, shielded behind a large rock formation." The car exploded. If you had been inside, or even within 20 feet. Thomas swallowed hard. You didn't get yourself out of that car. Victoria frowned, flashes of memory piercing through the fog of her concussion. The smell of gasoline, searing heat, the shattering of glass, strong arms pulling her from the wreckage, a rough, calloused hand against her cheek. There was a man, she whispered. The paramedics found you lying on this, Thomas said. He reached into a plastic evidence bag and pulled out a soot-stained, faded blue jacket. The police let me take it. There's a patch on the front. Pete's Auto Repair. And a name stitched into the collar. Victoria stared at the garment. It was cheap cotton, smelling of motor oil and smoke. Who is he? She asked. His name is David Miller, Thomas read from a tablet. 32, widower, works as a mechanic by day, drives for Uber by night. No criminal record, but he's swimming in debt. Unpaid medical bills mostly. His license is currently suspended, which is probably why he fled the scene before the cops arrived. Victoria reached out, brushing her manicured fingers against the rough fabric of the jacket. This man, this broke, desperate mechanic, had risked his own life to pull her from a burning car, and then vanished without asking for a dime, without seeking the glory of saving a billionaire. In her world, nobody did anything for free. Everyone had an angle. Find him, Victoria commanded, her tone brokering no argument. Victoria, you need to rest. We need to secure you. Caldwell is likely planning his next move. I don't care about Caldwell right now, she snapped, wincing as her ribs flared with pain. Someone in my inner circle cut those brake lines. Caldwell, one of the board members. Maybe even someone on my own security detail. I can't trust anyone at Vanguard. Not right now. She looked at the dirty jacket again. Find David Miller, Thomas. Bring him to me. He's the only person in this city I know for a fact wants me alive. The pneumatic drill squealed loudly in the cramped bay of Pete's Auto Repair. David Miller wiped a slick of black grease from his forehead with the back of his hand, sighing as he looked at the rusted undercarriage of the 1999 Ford Taurus he was working on. It was Thursday, 2 days after the crash on I-90. His forearms were wrapped in gauze beneath his long sleeves, hiding the deep cuts from the shattered Mercedes window. He had told Pete, his gruff but kind-hearted boss, that he had tripped and fallen into a glass coffee table. He hadn't slept in 48 hours. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the flames. He heard the explosion. He had seen the news, of course. Billionaire tech heiress. Victoria Croft survives assassination attempt. The media was in a frenzy. The police were looking for the Good Samaritan who had pulled her from the wreckage. But David couldn't come forward. He couldn't risk the police digging into his suspended license, the warrants for the unpaid tickets. If they arrested him, the state would place Lily in foster care. Foster care for a sick child was a death sentence. Hey, Dave! Pete yelled from the front office, his voice cutting through the noise of the garage. You got some fancy visitors. David frowned, setting down his wrench. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked out from under the hydraulic lift. His breath hitched in his throat. Parked directly outside the open garage bay were 3 identical black Cadillac Escalades. 2 massive men in dark suits and earpieces stood flanking the entrance, looking entirely out of place amidst the scattered tires and oil stains. From the center vehicle, a woman emerged. David recognized her instantly, though she looked different now. The soot and blood were gone. She wore a sleek charcoal trench coat over a high-necked blouse. She walked with a slight limp, her posture stiff as if she was in pain. But her dark eyes were piercing, commanding the space the moment she stepped into the garage. It was Victoria Croft. She walked slowly toward him, her heels clicking against the grease-stained concrete. Her security detail moved to follow, but she raised a single authoritative hand, stopping them in their tracks. David stood frozen. the dirty rag gripped tightly in his hands. He mentally calculated the distance to the back exit, but knew he'd never make it. Victoria stopped 3 feet away from him. Up close, David could see the faint yellowing of a bruise near her hairline, mostly hidden by makeup. She looked him up and down, taking in his worn jeans, his grease-stained boots, and the gauze peeking out from his cuffs. "You're a hard man to find, David Miller," Victoria said. Her voice was smooth, like expensive velvet, but with an underlying edge of steel. "I think you have the wrong guy, lady," David said, his voice rough. "I just fix cars." Victoria didn't blink. She reached into her trench coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of fabric. She shook it out. It was his blue mechanic's jacket, the one he had left under her head on the highway. "Pete's Auto Repair," she read aloud, looking at the patch. "And unless there's another Dave who wears your exact size and leaves his coat at the scene of fiery car crashes, I have the right man." David swallowed hard. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I didn't stick around because I have some complicated paperwork issues. I just wanted to help. You're alive. That's all that matters. You don't owe me anything. Please, just leave." Victoria tilted her head, studying him with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. "Do you know who I am?" "I watch the news," David muttered. "You're the CEO of Vanguard. You've got more money than God. Good for you. Now I have a Taurus with a blown gasket." He turned to walk back to the bay, but Victoria stepped into his path. "I don't owe you anything," she repeated softly. "You saved my life, David. In my world, a debt like that is a liability. I prefer to settle my ledgers." She gestured to the tall security chief standing by the cars. Thomas walked over, pulling a sleek leather checkbook from his breast pocket, and handed it to her. Victoria uncapped a heavy gold fountain pen and quickly scribbled on it. She tore the check out and held it toward David. David glanced down. His heart physically stopped in his chest. $100,000. It was more money than he had made in the last 3 years combined. It was Lily's heart surgery. It was a new car. It was freedom from the crushing, suffocating weight of debt that kept him awake every night. His hand instinctively twitched toward the paper. "Take it," Victoria said, her eyes locked on his. "Buy yourself out of whatever paperwork issues you have. Pay off your debts. Start over." David looked from the check to Victoria's face. He saw the cold, transactional nature of the gesture. She was buying her peace of mind. She was tying off a loose end. Suddenly, David thought of Lily. If he deposited a $100,000 check from a billionaire, the IRS would flag it. The state would investigate his income. His suspended license would come to light. The media would find out who he was, and cameras would be shoved in his sick daughter's face. He slowly lowered his hand. "I can't take that," David said, his voice trembling slightly, though he forced himself to stand tall. "Thank you. But I can't." Victoria's mask of calm slipped. Genuine shock flashed across her features. "Excuse me? Are you holding out for more? Because if you are—" "I don't want your money!" David snapped, the stress of the past 2 days finally boiling over. "I didn't pull you out of that car for a payday. I did it because I couldn't watch another human being burn to death. I have a daughter. I need my life to remain quiet. If I take that check, my life becomes loud. So take your money, Miss Croft, and go back to your ivory tower." He shoved past her, walking back toward the hydraulic lift. Victoria stood stunned. Nobody had ever walked away from her money. Nobody had ever spoken to her like that. She looked at the check in her hand, then looked at the desperate, proud man standing under the rusted chassis of a dying car. Thomas stepped up beside her. "I told you, boss. The guy is a ghost. Let's go." "No," Victoria murmured, a new realization dawning on her. She looked at David's hands, calloused, strong, capable of tearing a car door open. She looked at his eyes, fiercely protective, unbought. "Thomas," she said quietly. Whoever sabotaged my car is still out there. They bought off my mechanic. They might have bought off half my security detail. I have millions of dollars, and I can't trust a single person on my payroll." Thomas frowned. "What are you saying?" Victoria walked back toward David, dodging a puddle of transmission fluid. "Mr. Miller," she called out. David didn't look down from the undercarriage. "I said we're done here." "I'm not offering you a reward anymore," Victoria said, raising her voice over the hiss of the air compressor. "I'm offering you a job." David froze, lowering his wrench. He stepped out from under the car, wiping his face. "A job doing what?" "My personal driver, and my bodyguard," Victoria said, stepping uncomfortably close to him, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Someone tried to kill me Tuesday night. Someone with a lot of money and a lot of reach. I can't trust my own people, but I know I can trust you, because you are the only person who had the chance to let me die, and didn't." David stared at her, thinking she was insane. "I'm a mechanic, not a bodyguard." "You dragged me out of a burning AMG seconds before it detonated," Victoria countered fiercely. "You're resourceful, you're strong, and most importantly, you're not on my board of directors' payroll." "No," David said firmly. "I have a 6-year-old daughter. I'm not getting involved in a billionaire's assassination plot. Get someone else." "I know about Lily," Victoria said softly. David's blood ran cold. The wrench in his hand suddenly felt like a weapon. "What did you say?" "I had my security chief look into you," Victoria said, her eyes softening just a fraction. "I know she has a congenital heart defect. I know she needs a valve replacement before the end of the year. I know it costs $40,000, and I know you don't have it." "Don't you ever mention my daughter," David growled, stepping forward, his chest inches from hers. Thomas instantly reached for his holster, but Victoria waved him down aggressively. "I'm not threatening you, David," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "I'm begging you. Come work for me. Drive me. Keep me alive long enough to find out who cut my brakes. If you do this, I won't just pay you a salary. I will fly the best pediatric cardiologists in the world to Seattle. Vanguard Innovations will cover every single cent of Lily's medical care for the rest of her life. Surgery, recovery, college, everything." David felt the air leave his lungs. He looked into Victoria Croft's eyes. Beneath the cold, billionaire exterior, he saw genuine terror. She was a woman trapped in a gilded cage, surrounded by wolves. And she was offering him the one thing he couldn't earn with 1,000 lifetimes of fixing cars: his daughter's life. The rain began to pound against the aluminum roof of Pete's Auto Repair. "When do I start?" David asked. The Vanguard Innovations headquarters pierced the overcast Seattle skyline like a spear of black glass and steel. David Miller stood in the expansive, marble-floored lobby, feeling entirely like a trespasser in his own city. He wore a crisp, off-the-rack black suit that he had purchased from a discount department store that morning, but compared to the bespoke Italian tailoring of the executives bustling past him, he felt he might as well be wearing his grease-stained mechanic's coveralls. "Mr. Miller," a crisp voice called out. A young, polished assistant with a tablet gestured toward a private elevator bank. "Ms. Croft is expecting you in the executive garage, if you'll follow me." David rode the silent elevator down into the subterranean levels of the building. The doors slid open to reveal a pristine, brightly lit garage that looked more like an aerospace laboratory than a parking structure. In the center of the polished concrete floor sat Victoria's new vehicle, a heavily armored midnight blue Bentley Bentayga. Victoria Croft stood beside it, flanked by Thomas Harrison and 3 other burly security contractors. She wore a tailored slate gray pantsuit, holding a tablet and speaking in hushed, urgent tones. When she saw David, she dismissed the others with a sharp wave of her hand. Thomas lingered for a second, his eyes narrowing at David, before taking a few steps back. "You're on time," Victoria noted, handing her tablet to Thomas. I'm always on time when my daughter's life is on the line, David replied, his voice flat. Did you set up the consultation? Victoria nodded, her expression softening just a fraction. Dr. Eris Thorne from Johns Hopkins is flying in on my private jet this evening. He is the preeminent pediatric cardiothoracic surgeon in the country. He will evaluate Lily at Seattle Children's Hospital tomorrow morning. Vanguard has already wired the hospital an open-ended retainer. Whatever she needs, it's covered. David exhaled. A shaky breath he felt he had been holding for 6 years. The crushing weight that had sat on his chest since the day Lily was diagnosed lifted slightly. "Thank you," he whispered, genuinely meaning it. "Don't thank me yet," Victoria said, her tone snapping back to business. "I need you to keep me alive long enough to sign the checks. This is the new vehicle. Level B7 ballistics protection, run-flat tires, independent oxygen supply. Thomas personally oversaw the delivery this morning." David walked around the massive SUV, his mechanic's eyes taking in the reinforced suspension and the thick, polycarbonate-layered glass. He knelt by the front driver's side tire, running his hands along the wheel well, then popped the hood. "What are you doing?" Thomas barked, stepping forward. "The vehicle has already been swept by my team." "I don't care about your team," David said without looking up. He leaned over the engine block, inspecting the wiring harness. Ms. Croft's last car was serviced 3 days before the brakes failed, which means whoever cut the lines had access to the dealership or the garage and knew exactly how to bypass the vehicle's diagnostic warnings. They didn't just cut a wire, they engineered a catastrophic failure. He moved to the driver's side door, opening it and kneeling under the steering column. He pulled a small, high-powered flashlight from his pocket and shined it up into the wiring behind the fuse box. He traced the lines, his fingers moving with practiced precision. Suddenly, David stopped. "Thomas, when you swept the car, did you check the OBD2 port?" "Of course we did," Thomas sneered. "Standard protocol. Then why is there an aftermarket GPS microtransmitter spliced into the CAN bus network, piggybacking off the radio's power supply?" The garage went dead silent. Victoria pushed past Thomas, leaning into the open door. David reached up with a pair of needle-nose pliers he'd brought from the shop and delicately snipped a tiny, black square module wrapped in electrical tape from the wiring harness. He dropped it into Victoria's palm. Thomas went pale. I supervised the sweep myself. My guys missed it." "If this had stayed active," David said, sliding out from under the dashboard and standing up, "whoever wants you dead would know your exact coordinates, speed and location down to the yard, in real time. They could calculate exactly when you'd be stopped at a light or alone on a highway." Victoria stared at the tiny device in her hand, her jaw clenched so tightly it looked like it might shatter. She looked up at Thomas, her eyes blazing with cold fire. "A mistake like this could have killed me, Thomas, again." "Victoria, I swear to you." "Get out," she commanded softly. "Pull your entire team off the executive floor. I want an internal audit of every security contractor on our payroll by midnight." Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, but the sheer fury radiating from the CEO silenced him. He nodded stiffly, glared at David, and marched toward the elevators. Victoria leaned against the armored door of the Bentley, suddenly looking incredibly exhausted. The invincible billionaire facade cracked, just for a moment. "They're already inside," she whispered. "Before I even set foot in the car, they're inside." David took the keys from the roof of the SUV. "They're not inside anymore," he said, opening the rear passenger door for her. "Get in, Ms. Croft. We have a board meeting to get to." The Vanguard Innovations quarterly board meeting was held in a glass-walled conference room on the 75th floor, overlooking the rain-slicked waters of Puget Sound. David stood silently in the corner of the room, his arms crossed, watching the proceedings like a hawk. He felt the condescending stares of the 12 board members. They were titans of industry, men and women dripping in old money and tailored silk, and they all looked at David as if he were a stray dog Victoria had dragged in from the rain. But David didn't care about their stares. He was watching their hands, their eyes, their subtle reactions. At the head of the table sat Richard Caldwell. He was in his late 60s, with silver hair perfectly coiffed and a smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. Caldwell had built the company alongside Victoria's father, and he made no secret of his disdain for the young heiress who had taken his throne. "Victoria, darling," Caldwell said, his voice dripping with faux concern as he steepled his fingers. "We are all so incredibly relieved that you survived that horrific crash. But the stock has taken a 5% hit this week due to the instability. The press is calling it an assassination attempt. The board feels that, given your trauma, you might need to step back. Take a 6-month sabbatical. Let us handle the automated shipping merger." "The automated shipping merger was my initiative, Richard," Victoria replied evenly, though David could see the tension in her shoulders. "And I am perfectly capable of leading this company. My father trusted my vision." "Your father is in a coma, Victoria," Caldwell countered, his smile vanishing. "And this company needs a steady hand, not someone who requires a personal bodyguard in the boardroom because she's terrified of her own shadow." He glanced dismissively at David. "My security arrangements are none of your concern," Victoria snapped. "They are when the company is bleeding money because our CEO is a liability." Caldwell slammed his hand on the table. "You're pushing out the old guard, Victoria. You're firing contractors, disrupting supply chains with your AI initiatives. You are making enemies, and clearly one of them has decided to take action. If you don't step down, the board will call for a vote of no confidence." The room erupted into overlapping arguments. Victoria stood her ground, firing back with quarterly projections and legal precedents, fighting off the pack of wolves tearing at her heels. David watched Caldwell closely. The older man was furious, yes, but he didn't look like a killer. He looked like a corporate shark, a man who fought in boardrooms with lawyers and proxy votes, not a man who hired mechanics to sever brake lines. If Caldwell wanted Victoria gone, a public vote of no confidence was his weapon of choice, not a fiery car crash that would invite a massive federal investigation into the company he wanted to control. The meeting ended in a stalemate. Victoria marched out of the room, her face pale, David a step behind her. "He's going to do it," Victoria whispered as they entered the private elevator. "He has the votes. If he pushes me out, he'll dismantle everything I've built." "It wasn't him," David said quietly. Victoria turned to him, surprised. "What?" "Caldwell didn't cut your brakes. He didn't plant the tracker." "How could you possibly know that?" "I know how desperate men look," David said, thinking of the men he had grown up around in the rougher parts of South Seattle. "Caldwell is arrogant. He thinks he can beat you legally. A man who thinks he has a winning hand doesn't flip the poker table and shoot the dealer. Whoever tried to kill you is someone who knows they can't beat you in the boardroom. Someone who stands to lose everything, or gain everything, from your sudden, tragic death." Victoria stared at him, processing his logic. Before she could answer, David's cell phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a restricted number. He answered it. "Hello?" "Mr. Miller," a frantic voice said. It was Mrs. Higgins, his neighbor. "David, thank God. It's Lily. She collapsed in the living room. Her lips are blue, David. The paramedics are here. They're taking her to Seattle General." The floor dropped out from under David's feet. The billionaire intrigue, the board members, the armored cars, it all vanished in an instant, replaced by a singular, blinding panic. "I'm on my way," David choked out. He dropped the phone. "David, what is it?" Victoria asked, seeing the blood drain from his face. "It's my daughter, her heart. She collapsed." He hit the emergency stop on the elevator, resetting it to go straight to the garage level. "I have to go. I have to leave you." "I'm coming with you," Victoria said instantly. "No, it's not safe." "You are my driver, David, and you are taking me to Seattle General," she ordered, her voice leaving no room for argument. "My jet landed an hour ago. Dr. Thorne is already in the city. I will have him rerouted to the emergency room immediately." She was already dialing her phone. They sprinted through the underground garage to the armored Bentley. David threw himself into the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life. He tore out of the parking structure, ignoring speed limits, weaving the massive SUV through the dense Seattle traffic with terrifying precision. He didn't notice the sleek, black motorcycle that pulled out of an alleyway 2 blocks from the Vanguard building, keeping a steady, calculated distance behind them. The emergency room at Seattle General was a chaotic blur of harsh fluorescent lights and screaming monitors. David paced the waiting room, his hands trembling violently. Victoria sat quietly in a plastic chair in the corner, her phone pressed to her ear, working her immense power to cut through the hospital's red tape. Dr. Eris Thorne, the world-renowned surgeon Victoria had flown in, had arrived 20 minutes after they did, escorted by state troopers Victoria had somehow mobilized. He was currently in the trauma bay with Lily. "Mr. Miller," Dr. Thorne said, emerging through the double doors. He was a tall man with silver hair and a calm, authoritative demeanor. David rushed forward, his heart in his throat. "Is she—" David couldn't finish the sentence. "She is stable," Dr. Thorne said, placing a reassuring hand on David's shoulder. "But barely. The tricuspid valve has severely deteriorated. Her collapse was a result of acute heart failure. Mr. Miller, we cannot wait until the end of the year. I need to operate tonight." "Do it," Victoria said, stepping up beside David. "Whatever you need. A dedicated operating theater, an entire floor cleared out. Do it." "I have my surgical team scrubbing in now," Dr. Thorne nodded. "It will be a 4-hour procedure. I won't lie to you, David. It is high risk, but without it, she won't make it through the week." As the doctor walked away to prep, David leaned against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the linoleum floor. He buried his face in his hands. He felt a gentle weight on his shoulder. Victoria had sat down on the floor next to him, ruining her expensive suit. "She's a fighter, David," Victoria said softly. "Like her father." "If I lose her," Dave's voice cracked. "You won't." Victoria's voice was fiercely certain. For the next 3 hours, they sat in silence. The barrier between the billionaire CEO and the mechanic dissolved in the sterile waiting room. They were just 2 people, bound together by a bizarre twist of fate and the fragile life of a little girl in an operating room above them. Around midnight, David stood up to stretch his cramped legs. "I'm going to get coffee from the cafeteria down the hall. Do you want anything?" "Just black coffee, please," Victoria said, giving him a tired smile. David walked down the deserted, dimly lit hallway toward the cafeteria. The hospital was quiet at this hour. As he approached the vending machines, his instincts, honed by years of surviving tough neighborhoods, screamed at him. A shadow moved in the reflection of the glass doors at the end of the hall. David stopped. He stepped back into the alcove housing the ice machine, blending into the darkness. A man in a dark tactical jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his face walked quickly down the hall, heading directly toward the private waiting room where Victoria was sitting alone. The man's right hand was tucked inside his jacket. He didn't look like hospital security. He looked like a professional. David didn't hesitate. As the man passed the alcove, David lunged out. He grabbed the man's arm, twisting it violently backward, and drove his knee into the man's ribcage. The man grunted, stumbling forward, but recovered with terrifying speed. He spun around, drawing a suppressed 9mm pistol from his jacket. David batted the gun away, the silencer scraping against the wall. He threw a devastating right hook, his heavy mechanic's knuckles connecting with the man's jaw. The assassin staggered, dropping the gun. David tackled him to the floor, pinning him down and delivering 2 more brutal punches to his face, until the man went limp. Panting heavily, David patted the unconscious man down. He found a secondary knife, a burner phone, and a key card. David looked at the key card. His blood ran cold. It was a Vanguard Innovations restricted access black card, the kind only given to top-level executives and the highest tier of the security apparatus. But it wasn't Caldwell's name printed on the back. David ran back to the waiting room, holding the suppressed pistol in his hand. Victoria gasped, jumping up from her chair when she saw the weapon. "David, what happened?" "Someone just tried to kill you," David said, his voice deadly calm. He tossed the Vanguard keycard onto the plastic table in front of her. And this time they didn't outsource it to a mechanic. They sent an in-house cleaner. Victoria picked up the card. Her hands began to shake as she read the name. "Arthur Pendleton," she whispered. Arthur Pendleton was Vanguard's chief operating officer. He was a quiet, unassuming man who handled the day-to-day logistics of the company. He was always the peacemaker between Victoria and the board. He was the man who managed the company's vast real estate holdings and automated shipping fleets. "Arthur?" Victoria shook her head in disbelief. "Why? He doesn't have the shares to take over if I die. Caldwell does." "But Pendleton controls the logistics," David said, the pieces rapidly falling into place in his mind. "The automated shipping merger you were pushing. You were replacing human oversight with AI. What if Pendleton was using the old, unmonitored shipping lanes for something else? Smuggling? Embezzlement? The AI audit would expose all of it." Victoria's eyes widened. "The European routes, he fought tooth and nail to keep them under manual dispatch. If my AI integration goes live next month, every single shipping manifest for the last 5 years will be cross-referenced by the algorithm. If he's stealing from Vanguard, the AI will find it instantly." She looked at the burner phone David had taken from the assassin. "He didn't want to kill me to take the company. He wanted to kill me to stop the audit and keep his secret buried." Before they could formulate a plan, the doors to the waiting room swung open. Dr. Thorne walked in, stripping off his surgical cap. He looked exhausted, but he was smiling. "The surgery was a complete success," Dr. Thorne announced. "Her heart is pumping beautifully. She's going to be fine, Mr. Miller. She's going to live a long, healthy life." David broke down. Tears of pure, unadulterated relief streamed down his face. He fell into a chair, burying his face in his hands, sobbing. Victoria stood beside him, placing a hand on his back. "Thank you, Doctor," she said quietly. When David finally looked up, his eyes were red, but they burned with a new, terrifying intensity. His daughter was safe. The crushing debt was gone. He owed Victoria Croft everything, and the man who had tried to murder her, the man who had just sent an armed killer into the hospital where his daughter was recovering, was sitting comfortably in his penthouse. David stood up, checking the magazine of the suppressed pistol he had taken from the assassin. He racked the slide, chambering around. "Ms. Croft," David said, his voice cold as ice. "Where does Arthur Pendleton live?" The rain had turned into a torrential downpour by the time the armored Bentley Bentayga tore through the desolate streets of downtown Seattle. The city was a blur of neon and smeared streetlights. David Miller's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his jaw set like granite. In the passenger seat, Victoria Croft was typing furiously on her tablet, the pale glow of the screen illuminating her sharp features. She was no longer the victim of a car crash. She was a billionaire CEO going to war. "Pendleton lives in the penthouse of the Lumira, a luxury high-rise in Belltown," Victoria said, her voice clipped and professional, though her hands trembled slightly. "The entire top floor is his. It's a fortress. Private elevator, biometric locks, 24-hour armed concierge. He spearheaded the security contract for that building himself. If we call the police, his private security will stall them at the lobby just long enough for him to wipe the servers and burn the evidence." "Then we don't call the police," David replied, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He felt the heavy weight of the suppressed 9mm pistol tucked into his waistband. The adrenaline of hearing his daughter was safe had morphed into a cold, hyper-focused rage. A man had sent a killer to a hospital where his little girl was recovering. There was no universe where Arthur Pendleton was going to sleep comfortably tonight. "I have the building's blueprints," Victoria said, pulling up a schematic on her tablet. "Vanguard's architectural division helped design the HVAC system. There's a primary service elevator that bypasses the lobby and goes straight from the underground parking garage to the mechanical floor just below the penthouse. But you need a master keycard to even call it." David reached into his pocket and tossed the black Vanguard keycard he had taken from the assassin onto the center console. "Will this work?" Victoria stared at it, a grim smile touching her lips. Pendleton gave his personal assassin executive access. "Yes, it will work." David pulled the Bentley into a dark alley adjacent to the Lumira high-rise, cutting the engine. He turned to Victoria. "You stay here. The doors stay locked. The bulletproof glass stays up. If you see anyone approach this vehicle who isn't me, you climb into the driver's seat and you drive through them. Do you understand?" "David, you are not doing this alone. You are my employee." "I stopped being your employee the second that man walked into my daughter's hospital." David cut her off, his eyes locking onto hers. The intensity in his gaze made the billionaire heiress swallow her words. "This isn't corporate espionage anymore, Victoria. This is a father protecting his family. I am going up there. I am going to get the physical hard drives proving his embezzlement, and I am going to bring him down." Victoria reached out, her manicured hand gently grasping his grease-stained forearm. "He's dangerous, David. He's a cornered rat. Don't underestimate him." "I fix machines for a living," David said softly. "And Pendleton is just a broken part." David stepped out into the freezing rain, the heavy steel door of the Bentley thudding shut behind him. He moved silently through the shadows, slipping down the concrete ramp into the Lumira's subterranean parking garage. The air smelled of expensive exhaust and damp concrete. He found the service elevator tucked behind a row of utility cages. He swiped the dead assassin's black card. A green light blinked, and the heavy metal doors slid open. The ride to the 65th floor was agonizingly slow. David checked the magazine of the 9mm, making sure a round was chambered. He had never shot a man before. He had thrown punches in bar parking lots and defended himself on the rough streets of South Seattle, but he was a mechanic, not a soldier. Yet, as he thought of Lily lying in a hospital bed with a freshly repaired heart, his hand didn't shake. The elevator dinged softly, opening into a dim, cavernous mechanical room filled with humming server racks and massive air conditioning units. According to Victoria's blueprints, the penthouse was directly above him. There was no staircase. The only way up was through the central HVAC maintenance hatch. David climbed atop a massive steel duct, his mechanic's boots gripping the riveted metal. He found the access panel leading to the floor above. It was secured by a heavy magnetic lock. He didn't have the passcode, but he knew electricity. Pulling his trusty pocket knife, he pried the plastic casing off the lock's control box, exposing the circuit board. He sliced the main power wire, touched it to the grounding screw, and sparked a short circuit. The heavy iron bolts retracted with a loud clack. He pushed the hatch open and pulled himself up into the darkness of Arthur Pendleton's penthouse. The penthouse was a monument to obscene, stolen wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Seattle skyline, the Space Needle glowing like a beacon in the rain. The floors were polished dark mahogany, and the walls were lined with modern art that cost more than David could make in 50 lifetimes. But the sprawling living room was in chaos. Arthur Pendleton, dressed in a silk robe, was frantically shoving stacks of bound documents into a roaring fireplace. On the massive glass dining table, an industrial drill lay next to a stack of shattered computer hard drives. He was destroying the evidence. He had realized his assassin had failed, and he was scrubbing his life clean before boarding a private jet to a non-extradition country. "Fire is too slow, Arthur," David's voice echoed through the massive room. Pendleton spun around, dropping a ledger. His eyes widened in shock as he saw the towering, broad-shouldered mechanic standing in the hallway, dripping wet, holding a suppressed pistol leveled directly at his chest. "You," Pendleton breathed, taking a step back toward the table. "You're the nobody from the highway." "I'm the guy whose daughter you just put a hit out on," David said, stepping fully into the light. "Step away from the table." Pendleton's initial shock vanished, replaced by a cold, arrogant sneer. He raised his hands in mock surrender, slowly backing up. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Miller. You are trespassing in my home. My security team will be here in exactly 60 seconds. I pressed a silent panic button under the mantel the moment I heard you breathe." "Let them come," David said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I have enough bullets. Kick the remaining hard drives over to me." "You're out of your depth, mechanic," Pendleton spat, his eyes darting to a silver briefcase resting on the edge of the sofa. "Victoria Croft is a foolish little girl playing a man's game. She wanted to automate everything. Let an algorithm run Vanguard. Do you know how many families rely on the manual shipping lanes? How much money flows through the gray markets? I built the logistics network that made her father a titan. I deserved the CEO chair, not a spoiled brat with a liberal arts degree. So you cut her brakes. And when that didn't work, you sent a gunman to a hospital," David said, closing the distance. "You're a coward." Suddenly, Pendleton lunged. He didn't go for the door. He went for the silver briefcase. He flipped the latches and pulled out a compact matte black submachine gun. David fired. The suppressed 9mm spit a burst of air and copper. The bullet shattered Pendleton's shoulder, spinning the executive around in a spray of crimson. The submachine gun clattered to the hardwood floor. Pendleton screamed, collapsing against the glass dining table, clutching his bleeding arm. David moved in instantly, kicking the submachine gun across the room. He grabbed Pendleton by the lapels of his silk robe and hoisted him off the floor, slamming him brutally against one of the massive steel support pillars. "Where is the master ledger?" David roared, pressing the hot barrel of the pistol under Pendleton's chin. "The offshore accounts, the smuggling routes, the AI audit data. Where is it?" Pendleton coughed, blood staining his teeth, but he began to laugh. It was a wet, wretched sound. "You think you've won? You think you're a hero, Miller? You're nothing, just a pawn." He reached into his pocket with his good hand and pulled out a small black remote detonator. His thumb hovered over the red trigger. "My man at the hospital failed because he was arrogant," Pendleton gasped, a sadistic grin stretching across his face. "But I never rely on just one contingency. I have 2 men sitting in an unmarked van outside Seattle General. If I don't check in every 10 minutes, or if I press this button, they walk into the pediatric ICU with automatic weapons. They don't just kill your daughter, Miller. They kill everyone on the floor." David's blood turned to ice. The gun in his hand felt infinitely heavy. Pendleton had checkmated him. "Drop the gun, David," Pendleton ordered, his voice gaining strength as he realized he had the upper hand. "Drop it, or I press the button and your little girl's new heart stops beating permanently." David's mind raced. He could shoot Pendleton, but a dying man's muscles would contract, pressing the trigger. He couldn't risk Lily. He couldn't risk the doctors and nurses who had just saved her life. Slowly, agonizingly, David lowered the pistol. He let it drop to the floor. Pendleton sneered, stepping away from the pillar. He kept his thumb firmly pressed against the side of the button. "Good boy. Now pick up the drill. Finish destroying those hard drives. Then you and I are going to take a walk down to the garage. You're going to drive me to Boeing Field, and once my jet is in international airspace, I'll call off the hit squad." "You're a monster," David whispered. "I'm a businessman," Pendleton corrected. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany doors of the penthouse exploded inward in a shower of splinters and twisted hinges. 3 men in heavy tactical gear, armed with assault rifles, poured into the room. But they weren't Pendleton's private security. They were Vanguard operatives. And leading them, holding a massive shotgun, was Thomas Harrison. Thomas leveled his weapon directly at Pendleton's head. "Drop the detonator, Arthur." Pendleton panicked, his eyes darting frantically. "If you shoot me, my men at the hospital will open fire. You're risking a massacre, Harrison." "No, I'm not," Thomas said, a grim smile crossing his scarred face. He tapped the earpiece in his ear. "I just got off the phone with my Alpha team. 2 men in a gray panel van outside Seattle General have been permanently neutralized. Vanguard security swept the ICU. Your contingency plan is currently bleeding out in a hospital parking lot, Arthur. It's over." Pendleton's face went entirely slack. The color drained from his cheeks. He looked at the detonator in his hand, realizing it was now nothing more than a useless piece of plastic. He let it slip from his fingers. It clattered against the floor. David didn't hesitate. He closed the distance in a fraction of a second and delivered a crushing right hook to Pendleton's jaw. The corrupt COO crumbled to the ground, unconscious before he even hit the mahogany floor. Thomas lowered his shotgun, looking at David with a newfound respect. "Ms. Croft sent me. She figured you might need backup." "You secured the hospital?" David asked, his chest heaving, his knuckles aching. "Lily is safe," Thomas promised, giving a firm nod. "My men are standing outside her door. Nobody gets within 50 feet of that little girl without taking a bullet. You have my word, Miller." David closed his eyes, leaning heavily against the dining table. The nightmare was finally over. He looked down at a heavy, titanium-cased external hard drive sitting beneath the drill Pendleton hadn't had time to use. The master ledger. He picked it up, feeling the immense weight of the data that would tear the old Vanguard apart and allow Victoria to build something new. He tossed it to Thomas. "Call the feds," David said tiredly. "Tell them to bring a big truck." The crisp, cool air of early October swept off Puget Sound, rustling the golden leaves of the maple trees in Discovery Park. David Miller sat on a wooden park bench, a steaming cup of black coffee in his hands. He wore a well-fitted casual jacket, his posture relaxed, the heavy burdens of debt and despair completely absent from his shoulders. A few yards away, a little girl with bright, laughing eyes was tossing a frisbee to a massive golden retriever. Lily's cheeks were flushed with healthy pink color, her energy boundless. The scar on her chest was a badge of honor, a reminder of the battle she had won. "She's getting faster," a voice said softly. David turned. Victoria Croft was walking up the paved path, carrying 2 paper cups from a local bakery. She was dressed down today. Designer jeans, a cashmere sweater, and a light trench coat. She looked nothing like the cold, unapproachable billionaire he had pulled from the burning wreckage 3 months ago. She looked vibrant, relaxed, and remarkably human. "Dr. Era said her stamina will only increase." David smiled, shifting on the bench to make room for her. "She ran half a mile yesterday without even losing her breath. It's a miracle, Victoria." "It's science, David." "And a father who refused to give up," Victoria corrected gently, sitting beside him and handing him a blueberry muffin. Much had changed in the past 3 months. The titanium hard drive recovered from Arthur Pendleton's penthouse had been a treasure trove for the FBI and the SEC. It detailed over a decade of systemic embezzlement, bribery, and illegal gray market shipping operations orchestrated by Pendleton and several key board members. When the news broke, the Vanguard stock briefly plummeted, but Victoria had been merciless. She handed over every shred of evidence, firing half the executive board and publicly purging the corruption. Richard Caldwell, terrified of federal prison, had quietly sold his shares and retired to a private island, stepping entirely out of her way. With the old guard gone, Victoria had seamlessly integrated her AI logistics network. Vanguard Innovations was now more profitable and cleaner than it had ever been in its history. Arthur Pendleton was currently sitting in a federal penitentiary, awaiting trial, facing a minimum of 40 years without parole. "How are things at the Glass Fortress?" David asked, taking a bite of the muffin. "Quiet, for once." Victoria sighed, leaning back against the bench and watching Lily play. The new board of directors actually listens to me. Thomas has completely restructured the security division, and Vanguard's medical foundation officially cleared the last of your hospital bills yesterday. David looked down at his coffee. I still owe you, Victoria. More than I could ever repay. You don't owe me anything, David, she said, her tone suddenly shifting, becoming incredibly sincere. She turned to look at him, her dark eyes searching his face. You saved my life on that highway. You saved my company in that penthouse. For my entire life, I was surrounded by people who only looked at me and saw a checkbook. You looked at me and saw a human being worth dragging out of a fire. You gave me my life back. David met her gaze, seeing the vulnerability she hid from the rest of the world. After the incident at the penthouse, David hadn't gone back to Pete's auto repair. Victoria had created a new position for him. Director of Vanguard's fleet operations. He was no longer a bodyguard, nor a lowly mechanic. He was managing a global network of vehicles, using his brilliant mechanical mind on a massive scale. I like my new job, David said softly, a small smile playing on his lips. But I miss the Bentley sometimes. Victoria laughed, a genuine musical sound that made David's heart flutter. The Bentley is still in the executive garage. But I was thinking, maybe we don't need the bulletproof glass for dinner tonight. Just a normal car, a normal evening. David's smile widened. Over the past weeks of hospital visits, physical therapy for Lily, and corporate restructuring, a quiet but undeniable bond had formed between the single father and the billionaire CEO. They had fought a war together, and in the peace that followed, they had found something profound in each other. A normal evening sounds perfect, David said. Hey, Victoria, Lily shouted from across the grass, waving the frisbee in the air. Watch how far I can throw it. Victoria stood up, her face lighting up with genuine joy. Show me what you've got, Lily. David watched the two of them run across the golden grass, the billionaire and the little girl with the mended heart, laughing under the autumn sun. For the first time in 6 years, David Miller wasn't worried about tomorrow. The fires were out, the debts were paid, and the future was finally theirs to build. What a breathtaking journey! From the flames of a devastating car crash to the high-stakes warfare of a billionaire's boardroom, David and Victoria proved that loyalty and courage can conquer even the darkest corruption. Love can bloom in the most unexpected places, bridging the gap between two completely different worlds. If David's heroic fight for his daughter and Victoria's ruthless triumph over her enemies kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button. Don't forget to share this incredible story and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, real-life dramas. See you next time.